The first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, the U.S. is reportedly making plans for the possibility of Russia using nuclear weapons. Putin says he would use all available means to defend his territory. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin thinks Putin may actually follow through with that threat.
There are no checks on Mr. Putin, just as he made the irresponsible decision to invade Ukraine. He could make another decision. But I don't see anything right now that would lead me to believe that he has made such a decision.
And former CIA Director David Petraeus says the U.S. would be forced to respond if Putin goes nuclear.
We would respond by leading a collective effort that would take out every Russian conventional force that we can see and identify on the battlefield in Ukraine and also in Crimea and every ship in the Black Sea Fleet.
Jesse, how seriously should we be taking these nuclear threats by Vladimir Putin?
I don't take them seriously because he's not an idiot. That would destroy any sense of his country and his future. He'd probably die in a bloody coup if he did that, because we'd just destroy every target in Ukraine and take out as Petraeus said, their Black Sea Fleet and everything in Crimea. What I worry about is Joe Biden, because I don't know who Joe Biden's listening to. Is he listening to Secretary of Defense Austin, who's fresh on the job, who I don't even know what he thinks about anything? I just know he thinks white supremacy is our biggest threat. Is he listening to these other hawkish Russian, anti-Russian advisors that want more than anything to win their new Cold War against the Russians, because the Democrats have been so soft on foreign policy for years? Or is he listening to just rank amateurs like Ron Klain? So we don't know, but we know that we have to have a little finesse, because we have to manage the Russian decline. It seems like we have given them enough military capability to really eventually rout the Russians in the East. And how does Putin save face? I mean, you're going to back the guy into a corner. I don't think he's going to launch a tactical nuke, but he's going to do something. We just have to make sure we manage this appropriately. I don't know if Joe Biden's up for that.
But when it comes to these recently illegally annexed areas by Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, shouldn't we be doing more to hold Putin accountable, Katie?
Well, we've done a lot. We've done a lot of sanctioning. We've had a lot of tough talk. What you keep hearing is something you heard before the invasion, which is if Putin does X, the United States will respond in some way. It's always been following what Vladimir Putin wanted to do. There hasn't been a lot of deterrence on the front end of that. And when I hear people like General Petraeus talking about what we would do if Putin were to use a nuclear weapon, he's saying the United States is going to be drawn into a full-scale war against Russia. If he's saying you're going to sink all their ships, get rid of their fleet, target every single military installation in the country, in Russia and Ukraine, that is the United States getting involved in World War III at a level that is not just giving the Ukrainians weapons. Now, the U.S. interest to Americans is to prevent the United States from getting into a war with Russia. So they have to figure out what that means, and that may mean Ukraine having to come to the table and saying the areas that have been annexed are now Russia's and moving forward. Or it may mean continuing the war in a lot of ways, because people feel like they're winning against Russia as they try to recruit 65-year-olds and more 18-year-olds in the fighting force. But in terms of the deterrence, there hasn't been a lot there from the beginning of this. And all I hear is escalation about the United States getting involved in a war that Americans haven't signed up for and that Congress hasn't agreed to sign Americans up for either.
To that point, Jessica, John Kirby this morning was asked about this, and he said, we've seen nothing that would make us change our strategic deterrent posture. So are we doing enough to send Vladimir Putin a strong message, or a stronger message, to not continue to commit these atrocities?
Besides putting boots on the ground, starting a hot war, yeah. I don't know how people could say that Joe Biden hasn't done enough within the bounds of what the American people have said that they will accept. They want us to support the Ukrainian people fully without sending our own men and women over there. And that's what he's done. He's given billions of dollars. He's been the face of the international organization of leadership in supporting President Zelensky. You can hear it in the way that Zelensky talks about him versus other leaders, in fact. There is no more that he can do at this point, and probably to a lot of Americans, if they looked at the dollars that have gone out, they would probably say it's actually too much that he's done in support of Zelensky at this point. Vladimir Putin thought he would win this in 11 days. Then it moved to a couple of months. Last week, he illegally annexed 4 provinces. They've already taken 1 back. The Ukrainians are doing the absolute best that they can because of American assistance, because we are giving them all of the systems that they need to fight their way out of this themselves without sacrificing American lives. And that's what Joe Biden was charged with. Help the Ukrainians keep their country without sacrificing American lives.
Petraeus also, Greg, acknowledged what he saw as a number of setbacks for the Russian military lately. I don't know. Mike Pompeo was talking to Martha earlier, suggested maybe we're at a tipping point with this war.
Yeah, I don't. Here's the thing. I mean, it's still the fog of war. Every time I hear something that says that Russia's down and out, then you say, well, we're only talking about this amount of land. I do kind of get the feeling that Russia's in trouble because the dueling banjos of propaganda have actually kind of gone away. That makes me think that maybe they're in trouble. But I don't understand the problem with the P word. Every time you bring up the word peace, somebody thinks you're saying Putin. And this is the thing that really is wrong about it. I have a problem that everybody is pro-war and it's on the back burner. We're not even really covering it anymore. We're just pouring the money in. And meanwhile, Elon Musk, he tweets suggestions about seeking peace. And who attacks him? Zelensky and other diplomats, right? And it's like, look, you can't attack people who are paying for your war, right? I understand it. It is your country and you were invaded. But look, we're paying for it. We can have an opinion here. And I do think that my fear has always been that the billions of dollars is extending the duration of the war without changing the outcome. And I think what Katie said is true, that we have to have a kind of a sober analysis of what exit ramp you can give to Putin, right? Even if it's what he already had. To pretend that all of us knew the names of these places 2 weeks ago, that's phony. It's like, they annexed these places and we all have to look and figure out what they are. We don't know what they are. We know more about Iran, which is odd because there's a revolution going on in Iran and we don't give a damn about that.
Right.
We're doing this instead. So anyway, I'm just saying, is this in our interest? Who knows?
Okay.
There you go.
Conclusive. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.